Hello and welcome back to a brand new DNF1 F1 podcast. I hope that you're all doing well and thank you as always for being here. It's great to have you along for a bit of F1 chat and discussion. And here we are, the first review of the season following the Bahrain Grand Prix. And it looks like we picked off from where 2023 had left off in 24. And that is of course referring to Max Verstappen, the three-time Formula One world champion, very much showing the class of the field and pretty much laying down a marker for what we could expect for the 2024 season. But of course, we're going to get into the story of the race, how it was won, of course, and answer some of your questions in this review. And joining me as always, we have Lee Wallington on the panel. Lee, first of all, glad to see you as always. What did you make of the Bahrain Grand Prix?
It was a display of Red Bull teasing is the only way I could describe it. An intriguing P1, followed by an intriguing P2, followed by an intriguing P3, followed by a very close qualifying, which got non-Red Bull fans' hopes up that there may be a fight. Turn 1, Max, yep, done. And that was it.
I mean, yeah, that pretty much sums up the entire weekend. There was all the hope and expectation. I mean, realistically, I think we were all kind of expecting Red Bull to be the favourites, and I don't think it surprised many of us that Max Verstappen dominated the first race of the season. I think, you know, all the signs from pre-season testing, everything that we were hearing, I think from the moment that we saw the new RB20 when it was launched, we all probably thought, yeah, that looks like that's going to dominate, or it has the potential to dominate in Max Verstappen's hands. It would have taken an absolutely, you know, how could I put this? A disaster, I suppose, of a winter period for Red Bull to suddenly lose the huge advantage that they were enjoying in 2023 to then be not only in the mix for the race win and then having to fend people off throughout the entire race, but actually losing it altogether.
Yeah, I mean, they obviously went for a revolution over an evolution regarding their concept. The only way they could have really gone backwards is if they somehow fell for the Mercedes downfall schemes with their new side pod concept, which they obviously didn't because Adrian Newey is a genius and he's only built one or two bad cars in his entire career. So this doesn't appear to be one of them.
No, absolutely. You know, it's funny. Adrian Newey throughout his entire career has had a few stinkers, but this was most certainly not one of them. And the RB20 does look like a championship winning car. But of course, it's only the first race of the season. We can't write everybody off just yet because...
And you should add, Red Bull have had 5 days to dial in the car through testing and practice. Yeah. So perfect setup.
Yeah,
which may not happen every weekend.
No, you're right. They certainly won't get as much time throughout the rest of the season to, you know, optimize their setup for a specific circuit as they will in Bahrain. So there is obviously the potential that other teams will be able to gain more on them from that. And of course, other teams had problems as well, but we'll get into all of that momentarily. First things first, we're going to start the episode off as we are going to do this year with a 5-star review. Now, for those of you that are generous to leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcasting platform, we obviously would love and appreciate more of you to do so. And the reward is we'll read them out on the show. So for this episode, the 5-star review, we're dedicating this to Don't Worry About It on Apple Podcast. And Don't Worry About It, right? How am I just now finding out that you have an F1 podcast? Because I happened to listen to an emergency Harbour pod and I absolutely loved it. I call this the worst promotion in the world. You guys need more listeners and viewers. Great job, guys. Thanks very much for your support. Really appreciate that. And yeah, as I said already, if you do want to support the show, please leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcasting platform and a written review, of course, if you're on Apple Podcasts, and we'll read them out on the show. So thank you very much. Don't worry about it. Interesting name, but fair play. I can't exactly say mine's any better. But let's move on, of course, to the race itself. And Lee, I think for this particular episode, we should start it off by asking, how was the race won? I don't imagine this will be too difficult a review.
Well, the race was won by the sublime driving of Max Verstappen. He obviously had a little battle with Charles into the turn 1. And obviously the DRS regulations have changed this year. So you should add that in that they now open after lap 1. Or DRS detection opens after lap 1 instead of the previous, was it 3 laps?
It was, yeah. So obviously just to summarize really the new DRS changes for 2024, normally it'd be 2 racing laps before DRS is activated, so you get to use it on lap 3. It's now been brought a lap forward, meaning that you only have 1 lap without DRS, and then on lap 2 you can start using DRS. So that is a big factor where Max had to build a gap to Leclerc, who was behind him at the time.
He built a second in off the start line, and he was second clear by the second lap, and that's crazy. I mean, in last year, he built a second in the 2 laps, but now he's built a second in the first lap. So it just shows you the kind of speed and craft that guy has in that car at the moment.
Also, it probably is a testament to how well Red Bull have managed to create a car that's so good on its tyres, because, you know, throughout this current era of Formula One, and maybe even since the last 15 years, I think the key thing about these tyres is that you can't take all the life out of them on 1 lap. You know, you need to eke out that performance over the stint, because it will cost you heavily if you use too much performance. And we still see that today. And for Max Verstappen to be able to really put on the afterburners and pull out a second within a lap to those behind him, of course, this was complemented by the fact that Charles Leclerc had brake problems and George Russell was able to overtake him, which kind of created a bit of a bottleneck situation and which made it easier for Max. He still has to do that and then hope that he hasn't taken too much life out of his tyres. And he did that masterfully, and then obviously drove off into the distance, and we only really checked in on Max until he eventually won the Grand Prix.
Yep, I would say it must be really annoying for the Red Bull sponsors that they don't actually get any coverage from the reigning world champion until he stands on the podium. But there's the whole broadcast. There he goes. He's won the race. Where's my media coverage? I pay money to get TV viewership.
It's
so
true.
I think they have Sergio for that.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that a bit later on, that Sergio Perez is actually proven to be quite the commodity for Red Bull at the moment, which is a big reason why I think he should probably stay on, at least, you know, beyond this season. And yeah, imagine that Oracle paying, what was it, £500 million to Red Bull over 5 years, or $500 million, I can't remember which currency it was. And they only get about 10 seconds of screen time once where Max goes through turn 1, and then about 5 seconds before he finishes the race, really. But then that's long enough for a decent advert, I suppose, if Oracle want to show off that they're sponsoring the championship winning team, which of course they are. And yeah, so interesting thoughts on that one. But in terms of the strategy, you know, we should give Red Bull more credit than just having the best car and the best driver at the moment. The strategy from them was spot on. They saved a set of soft tyres, new ones, for the race, where the other teams didn't do so after qualifying. And, you know, that proved to be a masterstroke, because the final stint of the race, where there's always the potential jeopardy of a late safety car or something like that, which of course we didn't get, which is obviously provoked an interesting stat, which I'll reveal in a moment. But by doing that, they were obviously protecting themselves from a late safety car, which never came. But, you know, you've got to give credit to Red Bull. It was the perfect strategy on top of a car that probably didn't need a perfect strategy to win the race.
Yeah, the thing which makes it even more impressive was qualifying was very close. More so Q1 and Q2 over Q3. But plenty of the other teams had to do 2 runs of soft tyres. And Red Bull wasn't massively comfortable in Q1 or Q2. It was only in Q3 Max stretched his legs. So the fact that both cars managed to save a set of softs through that close qualifying period was impressive alone. So then carry that into the race. It was really a wonderful masterstroke. But for Max, when you're that far ahead, obviously you run your own race. You can get the perfect tyre life, and it just makes the strategy even easier.
No, it really does. And, you know, it's compliments to them, because I think it's very easy for a lot of us to see what Max is doing at Red Bull. And obviously Perez did a good job this weekend as well, coming second, and say, oh, it's the car or the drivers are doing it. The team don't need to really try that hard. But they really are. That's the thing. You know, not only are they creating the best car, they didn't have any reliability issues, which is one thing I think a lot of us were hoping that they might have in order to slow them down a little bit or give the other guys a better chance of beating them. They didn't have any of that, whereas their rivals were struggling with loads of different things across the field. It was quite amazing how that was happening. Their pit stops were almost faultless. I think only Ferrari made faster pit stops than Red Bull, and we're talking milliseconds here. But Red Bull, again, we always know they're great at pit stops, so, you know, you can't fault them in that. And the strategy was superb as well. So in terms of a weekend, it couldn't really have got much better for Red Bull on the track, at least.
Yeah, the only way they could have been better, statistically speaking, is Max fastest in the practice sessions in Q1 and Q2, which didn't happen. But that was the only way that it would make it a perfect weekend for them.
Yeah. Or Perez on the front row, but he didn't need to be ultimately. He managed to get to second quite easily, and he was never really threatened after that. So it was a good weekend from Perez as well. Another Grand Slam from Max Verstappen. Seeing us still talking about practice sessions, which of course, for a reminder for you guys, it's leading every lap of the race, pole position, fastest lap, and the race wins. So that's 5 now for Max Verstappen, which is quite amazing. 5 consecutive seasons, I think he's got a Grand Slam, which is impressive, and also matches Jim Clark and Michael Schumacher for having 5 Grand Slams in their career. 33 poles for Max, another race victory on the books. Right now, Lee, I mean, he literally is in a different league to everybody else.
Yeah, he is in the perfect harmony with the team for now. Obviously, we may get to that later. In perfect harmony with the car. And he's just in himself and his confidence. He's obviously matured a long way since he's joined the sport. And he's ironed out a lot of his weaknesses. And remember when Sergio joined the team, we were like, oh, Sergio's going to have the upper hand on tyre management because Max wasn't very good at it. But Max has got really good at tyre management now. And he's really ironed out those weaknesses, which has made him a more complete driver. And it's just really impressive to see how much he's matured and developed since he joined the sport.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you. Couldn't agree more. But let's move on. Of course, we've summarised how the race was won, which, as I said already, wasn't too difficult. It was quite straightforward. Max fending off Leclerc at turn 1. Did a good job there, despite not getting the best start, it must be said, but he managed to deal with that and then drove off into the distance, and that was pretty much it. You know, we see the memes online, you know, how the races usually go. It's like Max leads after lap 1 and wins the race, usually fast forward about an hour and a half. But we're going to break this down a little bit more now, and as I said already, we did this in the preview and it worked pretty well. You guys seem to enjoy it, so we're going to continue this for the season, and this will be the part of the episode where we're taking your questions. Now, at the moment, you can submit your questions to us on social media via the page at DNF1 on Twitter, or X, whichever one you want to call that, and that's at DNF1_official. And you can also reach out to us on Instagram and Facebook with the same handles as well. So if you want your questions answered on this show as part of the review or the preview, of course, then do get in touch with us and we'll read out the best ones on the show. Starting off with the first question that we got, and we got it from Chris Hughes. And Chris writes, what is your take on the Christian Horner situation? I was so excited for the new season, but I can't help but feel that this has been tarnished by this developing story that just won't go away. After the latest leaks, no idea if they're real or not, seem to have dominated the headlines over an F1 weekend to a degree I've never seen before. Do you think Horner can stay on as the Red Bull team principal and CEO? Now, that's a really good question. And look, we knew that we weren't going to be able to do this race review without having to talk about this, I think it's fair to say, because Chris is right. It absolutely dominated the headlines, Lee. It was present throughout the entire weekend. And I must admit, even though this is a very important and sensitive situation, which I think does not deserve to be, you know, hidden behind a curtain whilst F1 is going on, I think it was rather disappointing that all the hype and all the excitement over the first weekend of a brand new F1 season where everybody's interest is peaking, everybody's intrigued to see what's going to go down, and for the life of me, I couldn't help but feel that it was a bit tarnished because of what was going on behind the scenes at Red Bull with this ongoing story regarding Christian Horner.
I would agree. I think from a publicity and entertainment of Formula One, I think it's tarnished the weekend and it completely dominated unnecessarily. And it took the attention away from the drivers and the cars, which we, at the end of the day, we all enjoy and come to watch. Obviously, it's the political behind the scenes and everything that obviously some people also enjoy. But it completely took over. And I think it was P3 that Christian had a meeting with Liberty and the FIA to discuss it. And the rumours coming out of there is that they're not very impressed with the domination because obviously Liberty want to sell a product, which is Formula One, and the FIA want to go racing and don't want any distractions. So I don't think they're very impressed either. And it's a lot of there's parts of the Red Bull team itself that seems to be out to get Christian. regarding if the leaks are genuine or not. But there is definitely rumours coming out of certain aspects and parts of the Red Bull or people related to Red Bull. But then there's also, I think there's a bit of resentment in the media regarding domination, and then the media is obviously trying to sell a story, and just Christian Horner bashing to sell. And it's just, it's taken away from really what's the best part of the sport, which is the racing and the drivers.
Yeah, very true. And look, we're not going to comment or speculate on the legitimacy of the leaked documents that were put out apparently to loads of journalists. And I think as I said, I'm a big follower of the Race F1, and I think their journalist Scott Mitchell-Malm put out a great thread on social media, and he also recorded a video talking about this, and he confirmed that they had received these apparent leaks by this anonymous email. And obviously, whilst not going into too much detail, he was explaining that, look, as journalists, you have to try and seek out whether or not the information you receive is credible. There was obviously apparent threats to some journalists from legal teams that they couldn't talk about this or put this information out without the risk of being sued. He mentioned that he hadn't received any threats like this and hadn't heard anyone that had received these threats, but it doesn't suggest that those threats weren't apparent. They may have been, sent to some journalists. We don't know. And obviously, they're not ignoring this situation, but this is a developing story where so much is coming out all the time. Rumours and reports are going out. There was even stuff this morning, as we're recording this, about Jos Verstappen, and I'm quite happy to talk about this particular point, but apparently there was an argument and tension between Christian and Jos Verstappen at Bahrain whilst everything was going on track. And Jos spoke to the press, and he said that there is tension here while he remains in this position. And he claims that the team is in danger of being torn apart and it can't go on the way that it is. And then went on to say that, Christian is playing the victim when he is the one causing the problems. And in his opinion, Christian can't stay on with Red Bull following what's gone on. And that's really concerningly because, I don't want to mince words here, but Jos Verstappen, as an entity within Red Bull, I don't know where he fits in all of this, because he is the father of Max Verstappen, the three-time world champion. I imagine Jos manages a lot of Max's affairs within reason and is a huge influence on Max. And in a way, and I don't want to diminish his position here because I don't understand what Jos's position within the Red Bull outfit is, but he is essentially the influence or the person that represents the most important commodity that exists within Red Bull right now, excluding Adrian Newey, of course, and that's Max Verstappen. And for some reason, that seems to be playing a huge bargaining chip, or gives him a certain amount of leverage in what's going on at Red Bull at the moment, which I know sounds bizarre, but it's just adding another layer to a very complicated situation right now, which is very much distracting everybody from what should be going on the track right now, and that's us being excited about Formula One. Regardless of what Red Bull and Max Verstappen in particular are doing on track, it's hard to really focus and enjoy that when all this is going on in the background.
Yeah, but regarding Jos, I believe he manages Max, but he's part of, obviously, Max's inner circle. But from a management point perspective, obviously it's in his best interest, which is obviously his son as well, but it's in his client's interest to get the best situation for his client, which, yes, this is his son. So if he thinks getting more power or more say, or getting rid of Christian, who's going to give Max a better position in Red Bull, then he's obviously going to try and pursue that. But it's the fact of the obviously the leak of the argument they had. I suppose the argument they had. It's the team has a chance of imploding, but Jos is also stirring that implosion based off that leak of their argument. So one thing's for certain is that it's not over yet. There's going to be more to come. We're only obviously a week away from the next race, and there's going to be more coming next weekend, I'm sure of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more on that one, but we'll just have to wait and see what happens. It's a developing story. It's not one that I think a lot of us are welcoming at this point in time, but we'll just have to wait and see how this all develops. I'm sure this ain't going to be the end of it, and I'm sure, like most F1 fans, we just want to focus on the racing at this point. Obviously, this is an important story, but I'm not going to lie, it it did put a somber note on what was going on this weekend. We're all meant to be excited and gearing up for the action, but yeah, I think for now, rather than reacting to all of these stories and everybody trying to create narratives or spread rumours and everything else, I think we just got to wait and see what happens, and then we can just deal with it then. So let's move on to the next question. From Dave Doherty, our friend David Doherty. Hi, Dave. Hope you're well, mate. He comes in with another question to us, and he asks, what are your thoughts on the top 5 teams' expectations for the races ahead and beyond for this year? Well, I think, Dave, in answer to your question, I think it's more of the same from Red Bull on track, at least. You know, just continue to dominate, do what they're doing. I think that's one quite easy. And then I think for the 4 teams below, which I imagine he's referring to Ferrari, Mercedes, Aston Martin and McLaren in no particular order, of course, in their minds, it's getting closer to Red Bull. And if any of them can put a challenge to them, then fantastic. But I think in their own minds, they may feel that if they can't beat Red Bull, try and be best of the rest, really.
Yeah, the one thing that seems to be different, apart from maybe Aston Martin, compared to last year, is all the teams are very happy with their base they've got going into this season. Obviously, there was a few reliability issues or concerns from the first race, but compared to last season, when there was things that were wrong with the car that teams were trying to fix. Obviously, McLaren weren't happy where they were when they started the year. Mercedes had its zero side pod. Ferrari weren't very comfortable with the balance of their car, and obviously the downforce generated from the floor. But they're all quite happy at their base point this year, which means developments can go on, which can improve their pace and close the gap to Red Bull. But obviously, it's a lot of diminishing returns that, so there should be, in theory, more available. And obviously, you've got the budget allowance as well for time. So there will be possibility of gains on Red Bull throughout the year. But it's definitely an expectation would be to close that gap and fight Red Bull as best they can. It's what they'll be hoping for. And obviously, Red Bull will be hoping to open that gap.
Yeah, very, very true. We have to be mindful of that, of course. But I think this kind of ties into the next question that we had. I think it was from at Mr_Jabba, Xaba. Sorry if I've mispronounced that incorrectly. He writes, what a boring race, was his comment on the race itself. Are there any reasons to be excited about F1 this season? Well, I mean, off the track politics, obviously it's grabbed the attention of a lot of people, but I don't think that's the sort of thing that Mr. Jabba was going for here. On the track itself, it's a tough one because we spoke about this a lot last year, Lee, and obviously we can't ignore the fact that the championship fight and the driver that's going to win the race should be the main event or the headline. And it's very difficult to sell a product to casual fans, not just, regular fans of the sport, but it's very hard to sell a product like F1 to casual fans if we don't need to focus on who's going to win the race or win the world championship. And we try to encourage people to look at what's going on throughout the rest of the field if you're looking to be excited about what's going on F1. It's not really a good thing, is it? It's like saying, I don't know, if you are, I'm trying to think of an example at the top of my head. If you're trying to sell someone, let's say food, whichever fast food restaurant you want to go to, and they say, oh, by the way, if you're going to this fast food restaurant, the main attraction or the main order that you want, let's say you want a burger, I don't know, a burger and chips, and you tell them that, oh, by the way, we haven't got any burgers, but please do stay because we have a great variety of fries and drinks and sidles and stuff like that. You're probably not going to want to go and eat there, are you? So in terms of F1, it's a bit like that, where it is a bit hard, even though there is a lot of good things going on behind Max Verstappen and Red Bull in particular. It is very, very hard to sell a product like F1 if we're trying to encourage people to not invest too much energy and time into who's winning the race in the World Championship, because those are the main storylines.
Yeah, completely agree. I thoroughly enjoy the battles between the best of the rest, or even the back end of the field. It's been very entertaining, but obviously everyone wants to see fight for the race win. So having that analogy is a really good example. Maybe the FIA should look at changing the rules that Max always has to start last and he can come through the field by lap 20 and it gives 20 laps of excitement. And he'll still win. So, no, I would mainly not in jest. But yeah, it's obviously something that obviously Liberty and the FIA probably aren't happy with, especially Liberty, because they want to sell the product. And It's not no accusations or anything towards Red Bull or Max, but they want another close title fight because that sells seats, that sells obviously additional merchandise, that sells, and that just increases their revenue. And they're a business at the end of the day, and they want to maximize it. So they won that fight, and it's down on the other teams and even Sergio to bring that fight to Max. As much as Liberty were just like, yeah, there we go, sorted. But it's unfortunately it's not that easy for them to increase their profits.
Yeah, I think, as I said already, F1 at the moment is not focused on trying to attract hardcore fans, because the hardcore fans are going to follow and watch the sport regardless of. I mean, we sat through, what was it, the 2020 French Grand Prix, which I'm not going to lie, was one of the most boring races in living memory. It really was. But I stayed and followed it. I watched it. Obviously, I was going to enjoy it regardless of what was happening. But that's not that I'm not the audience, or the hardcore fan is not the audience that F1 are trying to bring in and preserve. My value is always going to exist regardless. But the more casual fan, who has as much right to have a say on how the sport should be governed or what they want to see from the sport as a hardcore fan does. We're not gatekeeping here, but it does seem right now that F1 is has a problem right now where the casual fan that they attracted through series like Drive to Survive and go into these flagship events and all the other stuff that they've done since they've been involved in the sport, they're now starting to lose those fans because they're not interested in following a sport where we already know who's going to win races and world championships before the cars are even unveiled, let alone try and sell them a product that this is going to be the best season yet when we've already engraved Max Verstappen's name on the world championship trophy before he's even turned a wheel.
Yeah, and especially I'm usually a casual American fan, for example. Obviously, Liberty's goal is to really break really more into the American market, and that's why obviously you got the great amount of races in the US. But when you've got close races in IndyCar, you obviously have NASCAR. There's probably other sporting events that I can't even think of, but those are close fights, and it's entertaining. It changes for the leads. It's a constant fight throughout the season. And if you're into motorsports in the US, you're going to probably switch to those because it's going to be more entertaining. Which obviously hinders Liberty Media's or Formula One target to really capture that or get an investment part in that market, especially after, as you said, the Drive to Survive and the brilliant battle we had in 21.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is a lot going on, as I said, behind Max Verstappen and Red Bull. There is a lot of exciting racing going on, and I think the broadcasters are trying to do the best job that they can to show that to everyone, to show that, look, there is a lot of stuff going on, there is a good narrative, but you can't help but ignore the fact that we're basically trying to still a fight for second or third place here being the main trophy, because Max and Red Bull have gone out and just won, and we know they're going to win, and we know they're going to win by a big margin. That's obviously not the product F1 want to sell. And I'm not surprised that fans are picking up on this. And I'm not saying here that F1 need to create some new rules to try and hurt Red Bull, because I think we've got to that point, Lee, where even if they did, it's not going to matter because it's probably going to hurt everybody else more than Red Bull anyway. So you're just going to create an even bigger gulf between the chasing pack and the leaders at the moment. So I don't really know how to answer that question to say what there is to be excited about. As I said, I think you need to. Oh, this is so hard to say without coming across as condescending here, or even contradictory. But I think if you are an F1 fan that loves the sport, and even though it's not as exciting as it can be, and as it has been in the past few years, yeah, I'm almost stumped. I really am. I'm almost stumped at this point. But thank God I don't work for Liberty Media F1 trying to sell this product. But there is a lot going on. But I don't blame people for being uninvested in what's going on, because the main event, the main headline is at the moment Max Verstappen dominating, and I don't see that changing at least until 2026. Maybe 25 will give us something good, but I'm not betting money on it at this point in time, so I don't blame people for feeling that way.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. As a suggestion, if you want to have some entertainment, pick a team lower down the field, and then you can enjoy their fights. They get points. Yes, brilliant. They've got points. They've got 1 point, 2 point. It's not a race win, but they score points. And for teams like Haas or Williams or Sauber at the moment, or RB, that's the fight. You pick one of those, they've got to win because they're in the bottom of the top 10. They've got a well proposition. You get the fight towards the end of the season where it really matters survival. And it can make it interesting if you choose a lower team like that to get behind and support. And it gives you a different perspective on Formula One.
I will say Drive to Survive do that very well. I think this is one of the best things about that series, where it gives you a perspective of every single team. There's a story there, there's a narrative, there's something you can get behind. And I think that's always been a good thing, because it's very easy for us to look at all the big teams and say, oh, well, that's where the interest is. Of course, most fans are going to follow those teams or those drivers. But those other teams as well, they do deserve some love as well, and they do deserve some support. So, yeah, that's always a good point. I mean, it was a great battle for P11. Ultimately, it wasn't worth anything in terms of tangible points, but it was still quite exciting to watch all that. And there are narratives there, which of course we can talk about on shows like this.
Yeah, let's move on. It's like, you may say a team in the back of the grid isn't worthy of support, but using Williams as an example, they're the second most successful constructor in the sport. Yes, they're towards the back, but they are a big team historically in the sport. Doesn't mean they're not worth its support, just as an example.
No, I think it's just a great example. Williams are definitely a very good example of that. And McLaren were there last season and have been there for a few years. And now look at them. They're in a good place again. But let's move on to the next question. This one comes from Martha RBF1. And she writes, would you say that this was the perfect weekend performance from Sergio Perez? As long as he performs the majority of weekends like this throughout the season, Red Bull will definitely have to keep him on for 2025. I agree with this one from Martha. And as I said, qualifying, that could have been a little bit better. Would he start P5? But he got a good start. He overtook those ahead of him quite easily. And the margin of deficit was only about, 3.5 tenths, which I know is a lot and probably will be a lot given how close everyone was in qualifying. It was very, very tight. I think in Q1, the field spread was just over a second, and I think if it wasn't for Gasly having a poor lap who started last, it would have been around just under 9 tenths. So the field spread is as close as it's ever been. I think Mark Hughes, the F1 journalist for the race, said there was a 1.8% deficit in performance between Red Bull's fastest lap and Alpine's fastest lap in Q1, and that would have been enough last year for P11. So the gap is definitely closer between the entire field, so that's a good thing. My point being obviously suggesting that, 3 tenths obviously is a reasonable gap. I think Red Bull was citing for Perez to have a deficit to Max, but obviously the goal for the field is so much closer that perhaps that needs to be revised a bit so that Perez could be a bit closer. But in terms of the rest of the weekend, I can't really fault Perez at all. And as you pointed out, Lee, he's the marquee driver for Red Bull right now, because if it's not for Perez, the Red Bull sponsors don't get any TV time because nobody's watching Max, because we only check in when he wins the race.
Yeah, I mean, he's getting the TV coverage because Sergio's never been the fastest driver over one lap. So obviously he's doesn't have that skill, but he's definitely proved himself capable of coming through the field. And to answer Martha's question is definitely if he keeps these performances up throughout the season, he will deserve his seat. Obviously, I think Red Bull's goals would be to repeat last year of a 1-2 in this championship. If Sergio can deliver that, there's nothing more that can expect from him to justify him being replaced.
Yeah, very much so. I think if Perez performs like he did this weekend for the rest of the season, there's no reason for Red Bull to replace him at all. And looking at RB, we're looking at Ricciardo and Tsunoda. They were having their own little fight on track, so neither of them really at this point in time would suggest to me that Red Bull needs to look elsewhere. I mean, of course, I don't think Red Bull's serious about Tsunoda at all. I've questioned why he's in that car already if he's not going to have a chance of being in the senior team. But Ricciardo's got to prove that he is so much better than Yuki to justify putting him in. And right now, I don't see that happening. But it's the first race of the season. We can't write conclusions just yet. We have to wait and see how things pan out, because we've been here before with Perez. Things start okay and then they start to go away. So hopefully for his sake, we get more of what we saw this weekend from him. So the next question that we got was, just looking through the questions I actually have. We did that one. Sorry, I'm so bad at organising all these questions. Here we go. Right, excuse me for a moment there. So a question we got was from The Only Way is Ferrari. It's an interesting handle there. But The Only Way is Ferrari writes, "Hi guys, big fan of the show. Thank you very much. My question to you is, Should Ferrari already be concerned that their driver lineup for 2025? Not only did their incoming driver Lewis Hamilton get beat by his teammate, but also their current star Charles Leclerc was also beaten comfortably by his teammate in Bahrain. Ferrari made a huge mistake letting Sainz go. That's a good question. Short answer, no. I don't think Ferrari have made a mistake at all, letting Sainz go by replacing him with Hamilton. It's a funny one because we're in this weird situation with Ferrari now where we're going to see a lot of what we saw this weekend between Leclerc and Sainz, where they are going to be battling each other. Sainz is not going to hold back because he is fighting for the best seat he can possibly get in 2025, and I have no doubts that he'll get one. It's just a case of where it's going to be. But it was really interestingly to see that even though Leclerc had problems and Hamilton had problems, Russell and Sainz proved emphatically that they are certainly no mugs at Mercedes and Ferrari respectively, and it's going to be an interesting story that develops throughout the season whilst we know of what's to come next year.
Yeah, I would say Russell did have some problems for a few laps with obviously heating engine, but what I found amusing with Carlos was the way that, at least from my perception, was the way Ferrari tried to engineer Charles to be ahead of Carlos. And Carlos is like, nope, I take that back. Nope, I take that. And he's out there. He's not going to play the team game. He's out for himself. I've always rated Carlos as a driver. And I think as a teammates, Carlos and Charles have actually worked quite well. Much like Lando, Carlos seems to be an individual that drills quite into the team and a team player. And so they have a good balance within the Ferrari team at the moment, which may not remain next year because having Lewis in the team and Charles, who's supposed to be the future star, is an intriguing balance within the team. Who obviously similar to what it is in Mercedes, that George is supposed to be the future star and Lewis is obviously a seven-time world champion. So there's going to be a change of dynamic in Ferrari, but I don't think something for Ferrari to be worried about just yet or concern. Lewis obviously he's had struggles with the car this weekend, so did Charles, where Carlos was probably out of the top drivers or top teams. Carlos was the only one that didn't seem to have any issues throughout the race, and he just performed brilliantly.
Yeah, I agree. And it's a very strange dynamic right now because Sainz, for me, if I was to argue who would I want alongside Charles Leclerc at Ferrari, Carlos Sainz is at the very top of that list. It really is. And it's annoying because we're in a weird situation now where I think Ferrari have the perfect driver lineup for what they need going forward. But if Carlos Sainz is going to be replaced by anyone, there's probably only two drivers on the grid that I would probably replace him with. And one of them is Lewis Hamilton. The other, of course, being Max Verstappen, but, that's neither here nor there.
Now they just need to replace Charles with Max, and then you have a Lewis and Max in a Ferrari.
Yeah, I mean, look, I love Charles Leclerc, but if Ferrari are going to do that, I mean, I'd have to really wrestle over whether I'd be happy with that one. But outsiders would they wouldn't care where Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, what team they were in. They just want them together and just watch the fireworks go. I don't think we'd be able to handle that as a spectacle, but it would be wonderful to watch it all unfold. But yeah, and at Ferrari as well, I mean, that'd be the perfect team to handle that relationship, wouldn't it, of all the teams? It's made in heaven. But look, in terms of Sainz's position, as I said, I think he's a fantastic driver. I'm gutted that he's not going to be there, but it's a scenario where we're going to see this unfold throughout the season. In the past, both drivers were quite happy to play the team game on occasions. I mean, Leclerc last year in Singapore was happy to play the team game so Carlos could get the win. Carlos has obviously been pretty good, despite, times on the radio when they've often argued to the engineers to say, look, let me go through, I'm faster than them. They've always had that between the two, but we've never had a situation where they've come together or a scenario where, other than Monza perhaps last year, where it looked like it might be in jeopardy, but they survived that. And I think you're just going to get that now. Carlos is not going to mess around. He's going to try and prove to Ferrari that it was a mistake to let him go. And I think Ferrari know that, but ultimately they're just going to say, well, look, you're great driver, Sainz, you're brilliant, and we wanted to keep you, but who's going to say no to Lewis Hamilton? He isn't. In terms of Mercedes, that's a different story as well, because I think this was a fantastic performance from George Russell this weekend. I think he's unlucky not to be on the podium, but I think given the cars that finished ahead of him, I think, fair enough. But in terms of his performance, I think he did very well in qualifying. I think that was a great job from him to get P3. And, he had some problems, but at no point did he ever look on like that Lewis was on par to him. He absolutely dominated Lewis Hamilton this weekend, and I know there'll be better weekends to come from Lewis, but that's the marker Mercedes will want George Russell to lay down for this season and keep that going for the remainder of the races.
Yeah, they Mercedes will want George to prove that he's the team leader. He will step up to the team lead role. Obviously, depending who the future teammate is, that dynamic may change. But if it's Kimi Antonelli, obviously George will need to be the mentor in the team as well, and they really want Mercedes to step up. George to step up into that role. But obviously, if it's a bigger name driver like, say, Fernando, then obviously that changes the dynamic. But they want George to prove that he is now in the ascendancy. He is now going to lead that team going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. George Russell is the guy now at Mercedes. Lewis Hamilton, obviously, there's a big reputation there and there's a lot of history there, and he's done so much for the team. That shouldn't be ignored. But if anybody thinks that Mercedes are now going to allocate equal resources and responsibility to their drivers as they may claim to have done in previous years, I'm sorry, but as every race goes on, Lewis is going to be more isolated away from that team until he eventually leaves. It's George Russell's team now. Whether the Lewis Hamilton fans will like hearing that or not, it is George Russell's team. So, yeah, we'll just have to wait and see how things go. But it was a good start for George Russell, and I think Mercedes would have been very happy with his performance this weekend, and perhaps they would have hoped a podium was possible, but, he had issues to deal with, so I think he did a good job overall. Next question that we got in was also from the Daniel Ricciardo fan. I can't quite make out what the handle is on this one. It's a bit strange. So we did get a few questions like this. So they were saying, what were your thoughts on RB this weekend? I was expecting a little more from them in terms of a points challenge, and yet they seem no better off than they were as AlphaTauri last season. It all seemed to be a bit underwhelming. Again, I think like a lot of these questions, Lee, it's the first race of the season, so we can only really put a fair assessment together after a few races. But I don't disagree with this one. I think I expected a bit more from RB, and in the end, the only fight that we really saw from them was fighting on the back end of the points, but then Ricciardo and Tsunoda fighting amongst each other.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I was expecting more from them. Obviously, they're going into the weekend expecting to be fighting inside the top 10. They expected to qualify with inside the top 10. And none of that happened. Obviously, Zach Brown's thing, it's going to be an RB19, clearly isn't an RB19. But there are obviously some Red Bull similarities, but the performance was underwhelming. But it is the first race of the season. They're still learning the car, still dialing the car. The drivers still understanding the car and how to drive it. So performance will come to the team, especially as upgrades come. So there will be an improvement. But yeah, it's going to be a power struggle within that team now to prove who's the team leader, because obviously it's been Yuki's team and Daniel now wants that team. So there is going to be a fight inside that team about who's the team lead.
Yeah, I'm a little bit curious about the logic behind the team orders that the team were making with obviously asking Yuki to let Ricciardo go. I mean, I can understand that they felt that, well, Ricciardo was on the softer tyres and he could go after the likes of Magnussen and Zhou. Now, people probably ask, well, why is that relevant when they're fighting for P11 at best? They're not going to get any points. But at this point in the season, you want to try and get a P11 if you can't get points, because that puts you higher in the Constructors' Championship, that best position. So that's why they were fighting so hard for P11. But the strategy was a bit strange in that Tsunoda kind of got screwed on strategy by the team, and he was fighting Stroll potentially for points at that time. So that's why he was a bit further down. So his race was already ruined by that, and that's why he was quite aggravated. But then, obviously, because they weren't able to get Yuki to move out of the way of Ricciardo, perhaps he lost the life out of these soft tyres that he needed to go after Magnussen and Zhou. And then we ended up with the chaos that ensued afterwards, where Yuki was messing around trying to not crash, but drive very closely to Ricciardo in the cool-down lap, which obviously we saw the team radio from both drivers there. So, yeah, it's a very odd situation going on there. Yuki is obviously not very happy. This is very much a team that I think is going to be centered around Daniel, and he's going to have to prove that he's good enough to go in that Red Bull seat. So it's a huge job for Lauren Mekis to have to deal with as team principal of this new team, but I think it's one that they probably fabricated themselves following the first race, and this looks like a trend that's going to continue throughout the season. It's definitely a battle to keep an eye on.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting fight, as I said. The balance will swing and change especially the background politics, obviously, of the greater Red Bull family may have an impact on the balance of this team. But it's going to be an interesting battle throughout the season. It's one of the things I'm really interested to see about who wins that into team battle by the end of the season.
Yeah, absolutely right. Next question we've got from Mike F1. And so apologies, actually, I should mention, if anyone can hear any power tools distinctly in the background, because we have got some people doing some work in the back garden, so you might on occasion hear a few power tools going on. So I do apologise about that. Try to mitigate that as best as I can. To Mike's question, and Mike writes, who are your standout drivers this weekend outside the top 5 teams? It's a good question. There was a few. I think we have to pay homage to Nico Hülkenberg. I think he did a great job in qualifying. Very unfortunate with the incident at Turn 1, which completely ruined his race. He did recover to a degree, but I think once again Hülkenberg's shown that he's very quick in qualifying and proven that Haas do have a reasonably good car. All things considered, we thought there were going to be slouches at the back, but Magnussen as well. Magnussen was brilliant on Sunday. What was he, P12? I think he did a very good job, all things considered. Qualifying could have been better, but, both cars in Q2, Haas, post-Gunfersteiner, look all right. They look better than I thought they were going to be.
Yeah, they really focus on their race pace, which has been and the tyre management, which has been really their Achilles heel for the last several seasons. So it's a good improvement. But as I said in previous episode, one of the things Haas has really struggled with is their in-season development. So they may start off great, but they normally fall behind throughout the year. So that's really another area they need to try and improve on this year.
Yeah, very much so. So, good start for Haas. I was worried about them because they are a team that often start strong and then fall to the wayside as the season goes on. I think we're all worried that they were going to start weak and then get progressively worse because of obviously the restrictions that they have compared to the other teams. But no, they started off pretty well. Good start for them. Hopefully they'll keep that going because there might be some points on occasion. I think this was a race where the top 5 teams pretty much locked out the points. We couldn't really count on any of their problems. And incidentally, we didn't get any reliability issues, did we, Lee? I think this was the first race, and this was a stat from Sean Kelly, F1 Statman, so we know this is pretty impressive. This was the first race, or the opening race of the season, that has seen no retirements in the history of the sport. So that is rather impressive.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That is an impressive statistic for the opening race. Well done to all the teams for the reliability.
Absolutely. You usually get reliability problems in the first race, but we didn't get any at all during the race. So well done to everyone on that part. I think other special mention to be made for Zhou Guanyu.
Yeah.
I think he did a very good job finishing P12 in the Sauber, which of course was kicked this weekend. It wasn't stake. We're going to see that a few times this year, I think. Bottas would have been up there as well in the race, I think, as well. But he, unfortunately, was caught up in the incident involving Stroll and Hülkenberg, where he couldn't really go anywhere. And then he had that issue in the pit stops as well. Literally, it was like 52 seconds.
He likes collecting his long pit stops. It's really something he should stop collecting.
Yeah, I mean, it's a record that I certainly wouldn't want, and I'm sure Valtteri doesn't want either. But obviously, the record for the longest pit stop, which was like 2 days. I think that Mercedes one in Monaco, where they couldn't get the wheel off the car.
Yeah, it was ridiculously long, that pit stop. That's the record, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, this one wasn't as close, but it was a good go. I mean, Valtteri Bottas Sympathy Corner, we often open it up throughout the year, and I think we've already got a few pages wrote in that particular book for 2024. So hopefully better luck for Valtteri, but I think he'd have been up there as well. So, great performance from Zhou. I think he did a good drive, and he will need more of that this year if he's going to stay there. And I think Lance Stroll deserves a mention as well, even though he's technically in one of the top 5 teams. He got caught up in that incident with Hulkenberg, which obviously I don't think it was Stroll's fault. He got hit by Hulkenberg, spun round, and he managed to finish in the top 10 behind his teammate. So I think he deserves praise for that, because there were no safety cars or anything like that to bail him out. So I think he did a pretty good job, Lance Stroll, this weekend.
Yeah, it was a good recovery drive for him after that turn one incident. It was a good recovery, and it's obviously nice to see him step up, because obviously I did say he was going to be a flop this weekend.
Yeah, well, we don't think his seat's in jeopardy under the situation that he's in at Aston Martin, of course, but yeah, that was a much more representative performance, I think, of what Aston Martin would want him to produce. Hopefully, in their mind, they'll be looking forward to seeing what he can do if he doesn't get spun round on the first lap and at the back of the field. So, no, good job from him as well. I don't think there was anyone else in particular. I mean, obviously, Norris did a good job at McLaren, but I think it's fair to say he finished where we thought he would be. And I think that those are the special shout-outs at the back of the field that I can think of. I think we've got time for one more question, Lee. And this one comes from Gasly Girl 10. She writes, Alpine, sigh. Need I say any more, gents? No, not really. I think we expected Alpine to flop, but I think after qualifying, when they were on the back row of the grid, and the reports that we were hearing that the car is still quite heavy and they're still down on power, the Renault power unit compared to their rivals, it's got all the recipes for disaster.
And now they're down 2 members of staff.
Yeah, absolutely right. I'm just circling through to find that report. But yeah, Alpine's technical director, Matt Harmon, and their aerodynamics, Dirk de Beer, both reportedly resigned from the team following the Bahrain Grand Prix. I mean, it's an absolute disaster going on at Alpine. I mean, the car is literally stripped down to the bare bones in terms of the carbon paint. I think that car's literally going to be all carbon next weekend. There's going to be no pink or blue whatsoever.
It's too heavy. Take off the paint. That's the first thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's a disaster at Alpine right now. I mean, Gasly and Ocon did put out a radio message to the team afterwards to try and pick their spirits up. I think I got it here. And he said, it's only round one. We keep going. We keep pushing. There's also a race tomorrow. Obviously, this was after qualifying. We got faith in you guys. Obviously, that's the right message to put out to the team, because everybody's going to have their heads hanging low. It's going to be hard to pick themselves up after this. But I'm not surprised that this is happening at Alpine. I think everybody has made huge steps forward, and I think this is a testament to how big a step everybody's made from 23 to 24. But Alpine, for whatever reason, are now paying a huge price for the fact that they're the only team right now that just doesn't seem to have a plan, or at least the plan that they're kidding themselves that they have. They keep revising it to the starting point again. They're not seeing this through. And given the high-profile names that they have lost over the past few years, people like Otmar Jafner, Alan Permain as well, this doesn't surprise me, but this is a very tough time for Alpine right now.
Yeah, I would just want to obviously just suggest that, so obviously some people are saying, oh, maybe Alpine should go back to last year's car as an improvement. But I don't think that would be an improvement because of the steps the rest of the midfield have been. This car is probably still better than last year's car, just they haven't made the performance steps everybody else has made. So using last year's car would put them even further behind if they were to do that. It's just, they just need a long-term plan that doesn't keep changing. And as Adam said, it changes every 6 months at the moment, which is not good for the growth and future direction of the team.
Well, but this is it. Like what we just explained earlier on, that the 1.8% ultimate pace deficit that Alpine suffered to Red Bull in session 1, that deficit would have been enough for P11 last season. So it shows how far everybody has moved forward. Like, we heard stories over the winter that Ferrari, or Mercedes in particular, because these were the teams we thought would challenge Red Bull, had found a 1.5 to 2 seconds extra performance on their 2023 cars. And we saw a relatively accurate reflection of that to a certain degree in qualifying this season. Yet they finished roughly second and third overall in terms of teams compared to Red Bull. So and the gap wasn't exactly a huge gulf to everybody else. Everyone had converged quite tightly. So if Alpine ran last year's car, they'd be like 2 seconds a lap slower than everybody else. So, you know, even though they have made progress with this car and it's a brand new car, it's quite worrying that, relatively speaking, the drop-off to everyone else has been quite emphatic for them, where they were the team that were most likely to challenge the big boys, but now they're the worst team on the grid.
Yeah, it's quite a fall from grace in that aspect. And unfortunately, there's probably going to be the scenario more more heads will roll as a new plan is developed, because this is not what the Renault board would have wanted for their sports car brand. Effectively, it is for selling their Alpine cars.
Yeah, and they've got two very good drivers in their cars right now, and that's worrying for them on that front, because that's probably the best thing going about the team at the moment is the drivers they have in those cars. But I'm pretty certain if you're a team boss in another team right now and you're looking at Alpine and you're not sure about your two drivers at this point in time, Gasly and Ocon are going to be at the top of a lot of people's list to try and poach and move on. And at this point in time, could you blame them? If they want, even if they went to somewhere like Haas, for example, there's probably more to be excited about there than there is at Alpine. At least with Haas, they don't have the resources, and you might think, oh, Gene Haas needs to invest more in this team to make it better. But they've shown that despite everything that's going on, they still have an idea or know what they're doing and how to move forward in the field, and they've proven that time and time again. Yet Alpine, they're the only team on the grid right now that I just don't believe they know what to do to be better. It's getting progressively worse, and I am seriously worried about them.
Yeah, I'm worried about them. And obviously, you've got the celebrity shareholders now within the team that they invested throughout last year, which Alpine published too much media attention. So they're obviously not going to be happy in that aspect. So it's going to get worse for Alpine before it gets better.
Yeah, absolutely. Some serious questions need to be asked to senior leadership. And we are getting to that point now with these 24 cars being the base for 25. There's only one team right now that has no idea what they're doing in terms of that. I don't see this pain going away at least until 2026. Alpine are in a very dire situation, and it's been laid bare for all of us this weekend, so we'll have to wait and see how that goes. But I think that's all we've got time for on this one. Apologies if we didn't answer some of your questions, but we will answer them on the next episode, where, of course, we'll be previewing the Grand Prix in Jeddah, which, of course, is another Saturday race, so make sure to mark your calendars for that one. But as we mentioned before, if you enjoyed the show and you want to support us, please leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcasting platform. Don't forget, if you're watching this on YouTube, to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And until next time, guys, we'll be back with another episode. We'll be previewing the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix in Jeddah in a week's time. But until then, thanks for tuning in as always. Please stay safe, and we will see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. And remember, as always, if you're not first, you're probably DNF1, or everyone except Max Verstappen. Thanks for watching.
Goodbye.